You won't believe what happened at the Windsor Castle state banquet. President Donald Trump was left in tears after King Charles III delivered a shocking ultimatum that nobody saw coming. What was supposed to be a friendly celebration of US-UK ties turned into an emotional standoff that had Trump completely stunned. As he wiped away his tears, the world watched in disbelief. Was this a turning point in their relationship? On September 17, 2025, a momentous event took place at Windsor Castle, as President Donald Trump and First Lady Melania Trump were welcomed by King Charles III and Queen Camilla for a state banquet that would go down in history. This banquet marked a crucial moment in the ongoing and often complicated relationship between the United Kingdom and the United States, two nations that have shared a long and sometimes tumultuous history. As both countries look to the future, this gathering at Windsor Castle underscored the strength of the so-called special relationship that has defined US-UK relations for generations. The atmosphere at Windsor Castle was one of royal tradition, elegance, and historical significance. The grandeur of the castle, with its rich history dating back over 1,000 years, provided a stunning backdrop to the evening. The state banquet, a rare and prestigious event, was designed to celebrate the enduring bond between the two nations. It was an occasion where the worlds of diplomacy and royal pageantry collided, as both King Charles and President Trump prepared to deliver speeches that would not only reflect the significance of the event, but also highlight the shared history and future cooperation between the UK and the US. The evening's events unfolded with the traditional splendor expected from such a high-profile royal occasion. As is customary at state banquets, both heads of state made their way to the Grand Hall, flanked by other dignitaries and senior members of the British royal family. Guests, including diplomats, senior officials, and other distinguished figures, gathered in the ornate dining hall, a room that has witnessed countless significant moments in British history. As the atmosphere buzzed with anticipation, the elegant setting hinted at the gravity of the occasion. This was no ordinary dinner. This was a night where diplomatic ties were to be celebrated and where history was to be made. President Trump, along with First Lady Melania, were greeted warmly by King Charles III and Queen Camilla. The traditional royal welcome was accompanied by personal gestures of hospitality, as the royal family took the time to ensure that their American guests felt both honored and welcomed. This event was not just about formalities. It was a reflection of the relationship between the two nations and the high regard in which both sides held each other. King Charles, having inherited a legacy of royal diplomacy, was keen to maintain and strengthen the ties that bind the United Kingdom to the United States. The evening's banquet was set against the backdrop of a changing world, one in which the UK and the US, despite their differences, have remained close allies in the face of evolving geopolitical challenges. The speeches at the banquet reflected the historical ties between the two nations, underscoring the shared experiences that have shaped their relationship. King Charles, in his address, spoke of the enduring bond between the UK and the US, describing the relationship as special. For centuries, both nations have been interconnected through cultural exchanges, shared values, and even conflicts. These bonds have been forged through history, from the early days of American colonization to the shared struggles and triumphs of both nations during the World Wars. Over time, this connection has deepened, evolving from one of necessity to one of mutual respect and admiration. King Charles reflected on the significance of the occasion, noting that the United Kingdom and the United States had not only fought together, but had also built something remarkable together. He highlighted the ways in which both countries had contributed to the betterment of the world, whether through trade, technological innovation, or cultural exchange. For King Charles, this relationship was not simply about diplomacy or historical precedents. It was about the people of both nations and the deep ties that connected them. He referred to the many Americans of British descent who had made their homes in the UK, and the British citizens who had built lives in the United States. These exchanges of people, culture, and ideas had only enriched both societies, he said, reinforcing the idea that the bond between the nations went beyond the official halls of power. the UK and the US have long shared a common language, which has allowed for deeper cultural connections. King Charles pointed to the influence of British writers, musicians, and artists on the American cultural landscape, noting that many of these figures had become household names on both sides of the Atlantic. At the same time, American culture has had a significant impact on the UK, creating a dynamic relationship between the two countries that extends far beyond the political sphere. King Charles spoke with admiration about how both nations had influenced one another through literature, art, film, and music, bringing both countries closer together, despite the physical distance that still separates them. King Charles also took a moment to reflect on the upcoming 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence in 2026. He acknowledged how far both nations had come since that pivotal moment in history, and he expressed his own curiosity about what the founding figures of the United States would make of the close and fruitful relationship between the two nations today. He mentioned the contrast between the revolutionary rhetoric of figures like George Washington and the reality of the current friendship, emphasizing how much the relationship had evolved from one of conflict to one of cooperation. The irony, he suggested, was not lost on him. The very people who fought for independence from Britain might not have imagined that the US would one day have such a close relationship with the monarchy that had once ruled over them. The king's speech, while formal, was deeply personal. He spoke of the sacrifices made by both nations during times of war, the tragedies that had shaped their histories, and the victories that they had shared. The relationship between the United Kingdom and the United States has been tested time and again, but each time, it has proven resilient. In his remarks, King Charles expressed his firm belief that this bond would endure for generations to come, not only because of the shared past, but because of the shared commitment to freedom, democracy, and prosperity. For President Trump, this banquet was an opportunity to reaffirm the importance of the US-UK alliance. During his own speech, he expressed his gratitude for the warm welcome extended by the royal family. Trump praised King Charles for his dedication to the British monarchy and for his leadership in preserving the heritage and values of the UK. He acknowledged the significant role that Britain had played in shaping the modern world, particularly through its intellectual, cultural, and political contributions. Trump's speech reflected the respect he had for the UK, but also his desire to maintain a strong and independent relationship between the two countries, free from the constraints of bureaucracy or unnecessary formalities. The evening at Windsor Castle concluded with a sense of mutual respect and appreciation, as both leaders reflected on the enduring bond that had shaped the history of their nations. It was a night for celebrating the past, while also looking ahead to a future where the US and the UK would continue to work together to tackle the challenges of the modern world. As the banquet came to an end, it was clear that the ties between the two countries were stronger than ever, and that this historic event would mark another chapter in the ongoing story of the US-UK relationship. While the speeches were filled with diplomatic pleasantries, the significance of the event was not lost on anyone present. The shared history, the mutual respect, and the recognition of the importance of the relationship between the two nations set the tone for what was to come. As the evening wore on, the banquet at Windsor Castle became not just a celebration of the past, but a reaffirmation of the future that both nations would continue to shape together. As the evening at Windsor Castle progressed, the focus shifted to the underlying tension that had been quietly brewing beneath the surface of the state visit. For many years, the relationship between the British monarchy and Donald Trump had been complicated by various issues, some public and some private. Although the official speeches and diplomatic exchanges reflected a strong bond, there were deeper, more personal dynamics at play that threatened to unsettle the cordial atmosphere of the event. In the years leading up to the state banquet, there had been several instances where Donald Trump's comments or actions had ruffled feathers within the royal family. The British royal family, traditionally known for its reserve and measured responses, rarely makes its personal opinions known in public. However, behind closed doors, members of the royal family, including King Charles, had been known to take issue with some of Trump's rhetoric and behavior. These tensions reached a peak in 2012 when Donald Trump made controversial comments about the Duchess of Cambridge, Kate Middleton. The remarks, which were widely perceived as offensive, drew sharp criticism not only from the public, but from members of the royal family as well. King Charles, in particular, was said to have been deeply displeased by Trump's comments and the media frenzy that followed. At the time, King Charles was actively involved in various charitable initiatives and was dedicated to preserving the integrity of the British monarchy. He viewed Trump's comments as not only disrespectful to the royal family, but also as an affront to the values of dignity and respect that the British monarchy represents. It was reported that King Charles expressed his displeasure in private circles, and there were even whispers of torrents of profanity directed at Trump behind closed doors. The tension was palpable, and it seemed unlikely that the two men would ever find common ground. Yet, in the years following the 2012 incident, the world saw dramatic shifts in the political landscape. Despite their differences, both King Charles and Donald Trump found themselves in positions of power that necessitated a degree of diplomacy. King Charles ascended to the throne after the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, while Trump became the 45th President of the United States. The dynamics of their relationship shifted once more, but the shadows of their past interactions continued to linger. King Charles was keenly aware that despite their personal differences, the United Kingdom and the United States shared a long and complex history that could not be ignored. The world was changing rapidly, and the two countries still had much to gain from maintaining a strong relationship, especially in the face of global challenges. As the state visit unfolded, it became clear that the tensions of the past were not entirely behind them. The royal family, especially King Charles, had a delicate balancing act to perform. On the one hand, they were obligated to extend the traditional courtesies and respect to the President of the United States. But on the other hand, they had to navigate the lingering personal animosities that had shaped their interactions with Trump. The situation was further complicated by Trump's reputation for being outspoken and sometimes unpredictable, which had made his relations with foreign leaders a topic of scrutiny. His diplomatic style was often described as blunt and direct, and this sometimes created friction with more traditional leaders like King Charles, who were accustomed to a more measured approach to international relations. The moment of truth came during a private conversation between King Charles and President Trump, shortly after the official speeches had been made. While the banquet had gone smoothly on the surface, with both leaders offering gracious words about the historical relationship between their countries, it was clear that King Charles felt compelled to address the elephant in the room. What transpired during this conversation was not made public, but sources close to the royal family revealed that King Charles delivered a direct and unambiguous message to Trump. The king took the opportunity to remind the American president of the tensions that had marked their past interactions, particularly the 2012 incident. He emphasized the importance of mutual respect, both for the monarchy and for the values that the British royal family stood for. President Trump, known for his combative style and refusal to back down in the face of criticism, was reportedly taken aback by King Charles's forthrightness. For the first time during the visit, Trump found himself in a position where his usual defiance was met with a calm yet firm resolve. King Charles did not raise his voice or engage in overt hostility. Instead, he spoke with the quiet authority that comes from years of experience in navigating complex diplomatic situations. But his words were clear. The relationship between the US and the UK, while important, could not be built on the foundations of disrespect or divisiveness. The conversation was said to have become increasingly tense as Trump struggled to maintain his composure. The president, who had long prided himself on his ability to control any situation, was now confronted by a leader who was not easily swayed by grand gestures or political maneuvering. Trump, who had made his career by challenging norms and defying expectations, was now face-to-face with a figure who embodied the very traditions and institutions that Trump had at times derided in the past. As the conversation continued, those present noted that Trump became visibly emotional. While it is rare for the former president to show signs of vulnerability, this encounter with King Charles appeared to have a profound effect on him. His usual bravado seemed to fade as he absorbed the gravity of the king's words. According to some reports, Trump was seen wiping away a tear as the conversation came to a close. The emotional response was unexpected, and it left many wondering whether it marked a turning point in his relationship with the British monarchy, or whether it was simply a rare moment of introspection on the part of a man who has long prided himself on his toughness and resilience. In the aftermath of the conversation, it was clear that the atmosphere at the state banquet had shifted. The tensions between King Charles and President Trump had not been resolved entirely, but they had been acknowledged. Trump, for his part, was said to have been shaken by the exchange, and some even speculated that it had affected his behavior for the remainder of the visit. It is rare for a leader of Trump's stature to show such a personal reaction to a diplomatic conversation, and this moment of vulnerability did not go unnoticed by those in attendance. As the evening wore on, the speeches that followed reflected a more restrained tone. President Trump, in his address, chose to focus on the positive aspects of the US-UK relationship, but there was a certain weight to his words. He praised King Charles for his leadership and dedication to the British monarchy, but there was an undercurrent of recognition that their past differences could not be entirely overlooked. For Trump, the conversation with King Charles had been a sobering reminder of the complexities of international relations and the personal dynamics that shape them. In the public eye, the state banquet was hailed as a success, with both leaders putting on a united front. The formalities were observed, and the relationship between the two countries was reaffirmed. But those who had been privy to the private conversation between King Charles and President Trump knew that there had been a deeper, more personal moment beneath the surface. It was a moment that would undoubtedly have repercussions, not just for the future of US-UK relations, but for the way in which Donald Trump would approach diplomacy moving forward. This historic encounter at Windsor Castle would be remembered not only for its grand gestures, but for the emotional exchange that revealed the complexity of the relationship between two of the world's most powerful figures. As the tension between King Charles and President Trump continued to simmer, it was clear that the evening at Windsor Castle had taken an unexpected turn. The private conversation between the two leaders, which had started with a formal reminder of the importance of mutual respect, had evolved into something much more personal. President Trump, known for his larger-than-life persona and often unshakable demeanor, was visibly moved by the exchange. The diplomatic pleasantries of the banquet had given way to a rare moment of vulnerability, one that caught both the American president and the British royal family off guard. The emotional weight of the conversation was not lost on those who had witnessed it. Trump, usually the one in control of every situation, had found himself caught off guard by King Charles's measured yet firm approach. The president's response to the king's words was not what many had expected. For someone who had spent his entire career projecting confidence, this moment of emotional rawness was unusual, even unprecedented. Trump, who had become known for his brash and unapologetic style, found himself in a position where he could not simply brush off the words of a monarch with a quick retort or a joke. This, in many ways, was a turning point in their relationship. In the moments following the conversation, it became apparent that the exchange had affected Trump deeply. The usual bravado that he exuded in public was nowhere to be seen. He had been confronted with something he had rarely encountered in his political career, a leader who was not intimidated by his presence, who did not seek to flatter him, and who was not afraid to speak his mind. King Charles had effectively reminded President Trump that, despite the political and economic ties between the United States and the United Kingdom, there were still principles of respect and dignity that needed to be upheld in their interactions. This reminder, delivered in such a personal and direct manner, seemed to shake Trump's usual confidence, leaving him reflecting on the complexities of their relationship. It was reported that, after the conversation, President Trump was seen wiping away a tear. This was a rare display of emotion for someone who had often prided himself on his ability to remain composed under pressure. The sight of a president, particularly one as politically charged as Trump, showing vulnerability in the face of a direct challenge from a world leader sent shockwaves through those present. The image of Trump, a man who had often been depicted as impervious to criticism, showing signs of emotional distress, was not lost on the media or the public. The moment was symbolic, as it seemed to encapsulate the power dynamics at play between the two figures. King Charles had not only engaged in a diplomatic exchange, he had taken the opportunity to assert his own authority, showing that the British monarchy would not simply defer to the will of the United States. Trump's emotional reaction was interpreted by some as a moment of realization. For years, Trump had been a figure who operated on his own terms, often ignoring the diplomatic norms that had been in place for decades. In many ways, his tenure as President of the United States had been marked by a disregard for the traditional protocols of international relations. But now, in the face of King Charles's quiet yet firm words, Trump was confronted with the reality that not every world leader would simply fall in line with his approach. It was a sobering moment for the American president, and one that many close to him believed had left a lasting impression. This rare moment of emotional vulnerability did not go unnoticed by the royal family either. Those present at the banquet, including senior members of the British monarchy, were said to have been quietly observing the interaction between the two leaders. It was clear that King Charles's words had left a deep impression on Trump, but it was equally clear that the king had been able to assert his own position without resorting to anger or hostility. The quiet power that King Charles wielded in that moment was not lost on anyone in the room. His ability to confront the American president with such candor, while still maintaining the dignity of the British monarchy, demonstrated a level of diplomatic skill that was both subtle and effective. The conversation between King Charles and President Trump had a ripple effect throughout the evening. While the formal speeches were delivered with the usual diplomatic grace, those who knew the context behind the interactions were acutely aware of the underlying tension. As the night wore on, it became evident that Trump, despite his usual bravado, was not entirely comfortable in the presence of King Charles. This discomfort was subtle, but it was there. The president, who had spent much of his career in the spotlight, surrounded by aides and advisors who catered to his every need, was now facing a monarch who was not easily swayed by flattery or charm. It was a humbling experience for Trump, one that he had not anticipated, and one that left him reflecting on the complexities of international relations. As the evening unfolded, President Trump's emotions seemed to have a lasting effect on his behavior. He was less animated than usual, his usual sharp rhetoric giving way to a more subdued, reflective tone. It was as if the events of the evening had forced him to reconsider his approach to diplomacy and his relationship with the British royal family. This was not the loud, brash Trump that the world had grown accustomed to. This was a man who, for the first time in a long while, appeared to be grappling with something larger than himself, something that went beyond politics and power. King Charles, for his part, remained composed throughout the rest of the evening. His quiet strength and diplomatic finesse were evident as he continued to engage with other dignitaries and guests. He had managed to navigate a delicate and potentially explosive situation with poise and tact, demonstrating the kind of leadership that had earned him the respect of both his nation and the international community. For King Charles, this evening was not just about reaffirming the strength of the US-UK relationship. It was about asserting the importance of mutual respect and understanding in international diplomacy. He had shown that, despite the complexities of his personal relationship with President Trump, he was able to maintain the dignity of the British monarchy and stand firm on the values that he held dear. As the banquet came to a close, the emotional undercurrents of the evening lingered. While the formalities had been observed and the speeches had been delivered with the usual diplomatic flair, it was the private conversation between King Charles and President Trump that would be remembered as the defining moment of the evening. This rare and emotional exchange had not only left a lasting impression on the two leaders, but had also underscored the complexities of the relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom. It was a reminder that even the strongest of alliances are tested by personal dynamics, and that diplomacy, at its core, is about understanding and respect. As the world reflected on the historic state banquet at Windsor Castle, the emotional exchange between President Donald Trump and King Charles III had not only captured public attention, but also sparked widespread discussion about the future of US-UK relations. The private conversation between the two leaders, though not officially made public, became the focal point of the event. Despite the carefully curated speeches that followed, the undercurrent of tension that had been established earlier in the evening was not easily forgotten. The moment of emotional vulnerability from President Trump seemed to resonate deeply, and it raised questions about the complexities of global diplomacy and the personal dynamics that shape international relations. In the aftermath of the banquet, media outlets and political analysts quickly turned their attention to the implications of this unprecedented exchange. For many, the conversation between King Charles and President Trump was a reminder of the intricate and often unpredictable nature of global diplomacy. Leaders of powerful nations often find themselves navigating not just political negotiations, but also personal relationships that can heavily influence their interactions on the world stage. The conversation between Trump and King Charles highlighted how these personal dynamics could sometimes clash with the formalities of diplomatic protocol, creating a moment of tension that was both human and political. The public response to the event was mixed. Some saw the emotional exchange as a positive sign that even the most contentious relationships between world leaders could evolve and deepen through honest dialogue. They pointed to the fact that President Trump, known for his unyielding confidence and often brash style, had shown a side of himself that was more vulnerable and introspective. This moment of emotional rawness was a departure from the bombastic public persona he had cultivated throughout his political career, and some saw it as a sign that even the most hardened political figures were capable of personal growth and reflection. On the other hand, there were those who viewed the exchange with skepticism. Critics of President Trump argued that his emotional response might have been less about personal introspection and more about a calculated attempt to present himself in a more sympathetic light. Given Trump's history of using public perception to his advantage, some questioned whether the emotional moment was an attempt to pivot his image after years of controversy and criticism. For these commentators, the tears he wiped away at the banquet may have been less about King Charles's words and more about a carefully orchestrated attempt to soften his image in the eyes of both the American public and the international community. Regardless of how one chose to interpret the emotional moment, the impact on US-UK relations was undeniable. The relationship between the two nations, which had long been regarded as a special relationship, had been tested time and again over the years. Both countries had endured periods of tension, sometimes stemming from ideological differences or political disagreements. However, at the core of the alliance between the US and the UK was a shared history that had been forged in the fires of war and diplomacy. Despite moments of discord, the bond between the two countries remained resilient, and the state banquet at Windsor Castle was a reflection of this enduring connection. King Charles, who had assumed the throne only a few years prior, was keenly aware of the importance of maintaining strong diplomatic ties with the United States. His leadership of the British monarchy was still in its early stages, and he understood that the US-UK relationship would be a crucial component of his reign. In his speech, King Charles had acknowledged the long-standing ties between the two countries, emphasizing the shared values and mutual respect that underpinned their alliance. However, the private conversation between him and President Trump suggested that there were still unresolved tensions that needed to be addressed if the relationship was to continue evolving in a positive direction. For King Charles, the conversation with Trump was not just about addressing past grievances. It was about setting the tone for future interactions. His words, measured and deliberate, reflected a desire to create a diplomatic environment that was built on respect and understanding. King Charles had long been known for his commitment to environmental causes and his support for humanitarian initiatives, and he had often used his position to advocate for issues that transcended politics. The state banquet, while a formal event, was also an opportunity for King Charles to reinforce the values that he believed were central to the British monarchy: values of dignity, respect, and responsibility. By addressing the tensions between himself and President Trump, he was signaling that diplomacy required more than just political posturing. It required a commitment to personal integrity and mutual respect. On the other hand, President Trump's emotional reaction to King Charles's words was seen by many as a significant turning point in his own approach to international diplomacy. Throughout his presidency, and even in the years following his departure from office, Trump had been known for his often combative and confrontational style. He had made a name for himself by challenging traditional diplomatic norms, frequently engaging in public spats with world leaders, and using his Twitter platform to deliver blunt, sometimes inflammatory statements. But the state banquet at Windsor Castle showed a different side of Trump, a side that was more reflective and emotionally affected by the words of another leader. Whether this was a moment of genuine personal growth or simply a rare instance of Trump being caught off guard, it had a lasting impact on how both the public and political analysts viewed him. The tears that Trump wiped away at the banquet became symbolic of the larger issues at play. They represented the complexities of diplomacy, the emotional toll that political leadership can take, and the personal connections that influence global relations. For many, it was a reminder that even the most powerful figures in the world are human, subject to the same emotions and vulnerabilities as anyone else. In a world where political leaders often appear distant and detached from the realities of their citizens, the emotional response of President Trump served as a stark contrast to the polished, stoic image of King Charles. It humanized both leaders, allowing the public to see them not just as political figures, but as individuals grappling with the weight of their respective roles. As the media speculated on the significance of the event, the focus inevitably turned to the future of US-UK relations. Would the emotional exchange between President Trump and King Charles lead to a more genuine and cooperative relationship between the two nations? Or would it be a temporary blip in an otherwise strained partnership? The truth was that despite the emotional moment, the relationship between the US and the UK remained complex and multifaceted. There were still significant political differences between the two countries, particularly when it came to issues like trade, foreign policy, and climate change. However, the state banquet at Windsor Castle provided an opportunity for both leaders to acknowledge their shared history and the importance of continuing to work together. In the coming weeks and months, the repercussions of the banquet would continue to play out on the world stage. The emotional exchange between King Charles and President Trump had set the tone for future diplomatic engagements between the two nations, but it was unclear what impact it would have on the broader geopolitical landscape. Would the moment of vulnerability lead to greater cooperation, or would it be seen as a fleeting emotional outburst with little long-term significance? Only time would tell. For now, however, the state banquet at Windsor Castle would be remembered as a historic moment, one in which two powerful figures, each with their own legacy and influence, came face to face with the realities of diplomacy. The emotional exchange between King Charles and President Trump was a reminder that, at the heart of all political interactions, there is a human element. The future of US-UK relations may be shaped by many factors, but the events of that night in Windsor Castle would undoubtedly leave a lasting impression on both nations and their leaders.